in the context of trying to change the nature of politics from this, it wasn't always that Parliament was as nasty as it is now. It wasn't always that after an election, but what's happened in recent years is that we're in a non-ending state of electoral competition, like a gladiatorial contest that never ends. I mean, it's no longer about governing in Parliament. It's each party has spin doctors who are trying to plan for the next election. I mean, the bills that are introduced these days, some of them are pretty innocuous from Stephen Harper, some of them are really devastating, but all the bills are designed as brochures. So, I mean, I went to law school and titles of legislation were never the result of marketing. They were pretty boring, really. You had, but now we have Safeguarding Canada's Seas and Skies Act. I took apart Canada's Safeguarding Canada's Seas and Skies Act. It was the most overblown, hyperbolic title. The Safeguarding Canada's Skies piece came from modest reforms to the investigation of airline accidents. But they saw an opportunity to dress it up to make it look like they passed something environmental. So what I'm trying to say is, in terms of the spiritual discussion and how we get to a better place as people, one of the things that's in our way in the political realm is the excessive power of political parties and the leaders' offices within those parties, who have made it a contest about power and winning for its own sake, and no longer allowing the members of Parliament who are elected in those parties to even contribute the gifts and the talents that they bring. Which is why I don't want to overblow what effect I've had. If you were to watch Question Period, you would say, well, this is horrible. They're still all attacking each other. The difference I've made is that now, after Conservatives attack me, they come over afterwards and say, I'm really sorry, Elizabeth, they made me read that. I didn't really, I didn't mean it. And I say, I know you didn't mean it. It's okay, And so, I mean, I'm trying to create a human atmosphere where we care about each other as people. But the spin doctors are still controlling what they say, and they're still running it as a very nasty place. And it doesn't bother me, because I know it's all theater for Question Period. The rest of the time, it's very pleasant.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage everyone to reread 1984. Okay? Because what Orwell had to say, we really are seeing ourselves move further and further down that road. The whole notion that if you can not just bore people into dumbness, but if you can reduce their thinking time into dumbness so that they can't think, therefore they cannot articulate, if they cannot communicate, then they will all buy the same widget at the same time.
When I go to international conferences, well, at first, I mean, of course, we have to, in functional terms, the problem is the first past the post voting system that allowed a party and a party leader in Stephen Harper and the Conservatives that really have never had much more than maybe 30% of real public support, and actually in terms of those who actually, only 60% of Canadians voted in the last election, and of those, only 39% voted Conservative, and it's a majority parliament. But if you go back to 2006, there's reasons that all this occurred, and I won't go back over it because it's political history in terms of bad decisions of strategy by the opposition parties, actually, that put Harper in control. But when I first went to international conferences in 2006, when Harper first said Canada has no intention of trying to reach Kyoto and changed our targets and everything, at first people would say to me, what's happened to Canada? Like, what's going on? With real concern, like, and now they no longer say that. They just say, why do people even bother to come? The fact that I'm leader of the Green Party doesn't cut me any slack. As a Canadian, I get hated, like right off the bat. It's really painful. You say, well, well, you guys keep it. So the explanation for what's happening to Canada is that for one brief, anomalous period in our history, we have a truly awful government. Truly awful. Now, that can be fixed, that can be changed, and we're going to have a lot of work, which will be exciting and fun and positive and creative, to rebuild what we used to have in a whole slew of environmental laws, policies, institutions, criminal justice plans, refugee and immigration law. We're going to have to rebuild a whole lot of stuff. And I think that day is coming soon, and we're going to be we're going to be finished with the wrecking phase, and we're going to be back to that, how do we rebuild this? And then the challenge for Canadians who notice this happening is, how do we rebuild to better than what we were? How do we really shake ourselves out of complacency about how good we were before, and really examine it and ask, what could we do that would be way better than anything we ever did before? And how do we actually be the first country within the G8 to decide we're carbon neutral? By the way, there are a lot of developing countries committed to being carbon neutral. Ethiopia, South Africa, a lot of countries say, we want a development path that takes us to being carbon neutral. Now, unfortunately, they're still not, but there's a lot more discussion out there of really creative. By the way, Scotland, just to give you another example, Scotland's on track by 2020 to be 40% below 1990 levels of greenhouse gases. Canada's target under Harper is to be 3% above 1990 levels by 2020, but there's absolutely no chance of that happening on current policies. We're nowhere near it. So there's a lot going on around the world, and we can get back to what we used to be very soon. But when the opportunity comes, we're going to have to jump on it. We're not going to be able to say, oh, well, things will automatically get better because the government has changed. We're going to have to be extremely active. Actually, I don't want to wait till the election. We have to be doing it now. But your point's a good one. We were much better, but we're still the same people. We can still get back to what we were and then say, let's make it a lot better than where we started from before the wrecking ball hit.
I would also like to say that my experience of being Canadian is I find us too insular. I don't think we look outward enough. I don't think we belong to the world. Too much of the time we're just comfortable to be where we are. It's time for us to look around and see the great examples out there and start pushing towards us to that and start telling each other that that's what we can do.
This kind of brings us back to an earlier discussion that we had. If we are so outraged and we are so angry and we want things to change as much as we do, we have to get our voices out there. We have to tell as many people as we could possibly muster how much we want things to be different than they are now. Think of the end game. Think of what you really want things to be, and try and figure out how we can get there. And it involves working at the local level. It involves speaking with your elected officials at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level, and doing whatever it is within your power to walk the walk yourself. And really, that's what we need to be doing.
The nature of the first past the post voting system is that political parties, and it's not so much about what Justin is like as a person or what Thomas Mulcair is like as a person. It's not about them at all. It's about the political party structure and the people who control those parties, who are not looking for areas of agreement or consensus with their parties. Their goal is to find what they call the wedge issue. They want to differentiate themselves from everybody else, and the parties that are closest to them ideologically are the most likely to get a sharp elbow in the eye as they go by. So we wouldn't be in the mess we are in now as a country, and forgive me for saying it, but it's what happened, is that in 2005, the NDP, the Liberals, no, the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Bloc consciously brought down a minority parliament of Paul Martin's. Had the NDP gone to Paul Martin and said, we will prop up your government, but only on the on the condition that we form a coalition, I bet Paul Martin would have said, great, let's do that, because that would have kept him in, and the policies that we were developing then could have kept going. The NDP decided that strategically their best opportunity to grow their political space, to elect more MPs, was by forming an alliance with the Conservatives to destroy the Liberal Party. That's what's been happening. That's what's been playing out every election since 2005, when the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP essentially work together to bring down the last Liberal minority parliament we had. I try all the time to reach out to opposition. We all share a big, long, kind of funny living room space right behind Parliament, right behind the curtains. If you watch Parliament on TV and there's those curtains, the Liberals, the NDP, the Bloc and the Green Party share that space. It's a lot like that old show WKRP in Cincinnati with Les Nessman's desk with the fake walls of masking tape, because there's NDP territory and there's Liberal territory, and I've got a chair in the corner. But I keep trying, because the most effective things we've ever done as an opposition have been when we worked together. Unfortunately, what I see day after day is that the NDP strategies are 90% of the time designed to make the Liberals look bad later in an election. And if we were working together, as we did on C-38, the 2012 Omnibus Budget Bill, we would so much more inspire Canadians. We'd be so much more effective in calling out what's wrong with the governing party's policies. So leading up to an election, I continue to try. And individuals within all of the parties are totally on board with what you're saying. But the people who control the parties, who, by the way, never run for office and you wouldn't know their faces or their names, want to try to run it on this basis, as I mentioned earlier, of this ongoing gladiatorial contest of kill the other guy, leave them dead in the gutter, and move on to your next conquest. And it's an unhealthy culture, for sure. And cooperation is by far the better goal. We will get there politically when we get rid of first past the post, because a different voting system would create a different political culture. And that's one of the things that I think we must do. I think that the 2006 election, the interference of the state police, the RCMP, in making a press release alleging scandalous illegal behavior by the Liberals when they were totally going, we had the sponsorship scandal. Paul Martin ordered the Gomery Commission. The people were prepared to think, okay, maybe that was in the past and they're now behaving themselves. That RCMP press release right before Christmas alleging that Ralph Goodale may have had insider trading information around not taxing income trusts definitely had an impact on the entire election. And the only place it was ever investigated was by the Public Complaints Commission on the RCMP. And I read that report, which actually detailed, okay, here's the moment where that press release happened. Here's what the polls were saying ahead of it. Here's what happened after it. The interference of the state police in an election. Can you imagine if we were hearing that news out of Zimbabwe, what we would think about the health of that electoral system? Nobody demanded an answer afterwards. Zaccardelli was the former commissioner of RCMP, was not required to give evidence. The Public Complaints Commission on the RCMP didn't have the power to compel his evidence. They asked him to explain himself. He said he was not willing to do so, and they had no ability, and nobody in Parliament afterwards, other than the Greens, and we weren't yet in Parliament. So I'm just mentioning that there's the robocall scandal was essentially, and I don't know how much the robocall issue actually affected whether the election was quote-unquote stolen, but I do know that the difference between a Conservative majority and a Conservative minority was a handful of ridings with a cumulative total of less than, or roughly 6,000 votes over 30 million Canadians. So something's wrong with that. And because we never had a proper investigation of the robocall issue, because Elections Canada doesn't have the appropriate tools, yesterday, Elections Canada said there's no basis for charges, we can't do anything. So I am concerned about the health of our electoral process, that we have had now several elections where there's been funny business, at least. It may or may not affect the outcome of the election. One thing is for sure, the problem in Canada is that the largest voting bloc in 2011 was the people who stayed home. So as there's increasing cynicism and a lack of faith in the fairness of the voting system, that's not going to help get people to the polls. But if we all take on board, in terms of, again, personal action, that we're going to make sure that everybody we know, whether it's the guy we buy our newspaper from at the corner store, or all our friends and family, or the people we work with. We're going to take it on as a personal task, not how they vote, but do they vote. I mean, it really is, it would make a big difference if everybody who was alarmed about the fairness of our elections worked really hard before the vote to see how many people they could get to the polls at the advance polls. Or people who say, I never have time to vote. Well, do you know you could go down right now? Because from the minute the writ drops, the returning officer's office is open to vote anytime. Come on down with me now, right? Anything you can do to get more people who might not ordinarily vote to the polls. Dollars to donuts, the fairer vote of more people doesn't preference the Conservative Party. I'm pretty sure of this because I think the Conservative Party does really better research than the Greens can afford, and they've gone to a lot of effort to try to block young people from voting. They've gone to a lot of effort to make it harder for street people to vote. They've gone to a lot of effort to scare liberals from voting by running non-stop attack ads against liberal leaders, one after the other, which isn't about convincing people to vote Conservative, it's about voter suppression. So assuming that the Conservatives know what they're doing and spend their money wisely, they don't want certain segments of the Canadian population to vote. So let's just encourage those people, like even if it means offering a ride down to the polls, the week ahead of the election, let's go. So that would make a big difference, I believe.